This is the Holy Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Now before the festival of the Passover, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The devil had already put into the heart of Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to betray him. And during supper, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, got up from the table, took off his outer robe, and tied a towel around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, to wipe them with the towel that was tied around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You do not know what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no share with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Lord, not my feet only, but also my hands and my head." Jesus said to him, "One who is bathed does not need to wash except for the feet, but is entirely clean, and you are clean, though not all of you." For he knew who was to betray him. For this reason he said, "Not all of you are clean." After he had washed their feet, had put on his robe, and had returned to the table, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you are right, for that is what I am. So if I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have set you an example that you also should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, servants are not greater than their master, nor are messengers greater than the one who sent them. If you know these things, you are blessed if you do them. Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. This is the Holy Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord. You may be seated. Please pray with me. Gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be acceptable to you, for you, Lord, are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. You know that feeling when you're on the brink of tears, but they just haven't come yet? You can feel a lump in your throat while your eyes sting ever so slightly, your nose itchy, and pressure begins to build inside of your stomach and your heart. That's where I've been this week. Sad, but not quite knowing why. And I wonder if on this night, the night of his final meal, the night of his final gathering with his friends, Jesus felt that way as well, knowing that this was the end, seeing the signs of betrayal all around him, the whispering of the crowds, his close friend Judas pulling away from him. I wonder if the other disciples could sense it as well, a feeling of foreboding, yet not quite knowing where it was coming from, a tickle in the back of their throats and their eyes tingling on the brink of tears. Metaphorically, this is where we all are this time of year, Maundy Thursday. We all know this story so well as we hear it and live it every year. This story of anticipating the inevitable crucifixion of Jesus, and then the waiting between that horrific moment and the glory of Easter yet to come. And although we live this out every year, this story, this day reminds us to stay present, right here, to stay inside of our bodies as Jesus washes the bodies of his beloved disciples, to stay present with the feeling of impending grief, to hold the inevitable sorrow close to ourselves as we are held closely to the heart of Jesus. Our reading today jumps from verse 17 to 33b. Sometimes the lectionary does weird things like that. But in between, we find verses 21 through 25, where Jesus speaks of his betrayal. The verses read, "After he had said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, 'Very truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me.' His disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to this disciple and said, 'Ask him which one he means.' Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, 'Lord, who is it?'" In these verses, we see the beloved disciple leaning against Jesus, held by Jesus. Jesus speaks of the hurt that he himself is about to experience, and yet Jesus holds his friend. And that's where we are invited to today as well. As we anticipate the brutal crucifixion of Jesus, we are invited to lean back against Jesus, with our head against his heart, held in his sweet embrace. And as Jesus holds his disciples' body just hours before his death, he commands them one last thing. "Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another." Jesus says these words minutes after bowing before them, submitting himself to them in deep humility as a servant. Because this act and these words are tied together, we know that Jesus was saying, love one another in this way, as servants to one another, humbling yourselves before one another. This story is about foot washing, it is about humility, and it's about being held in love. It's about how the three are connected, and how you can't love someone without serving them in humility, and how in the act of humbly serving someone, putting their will before your own, seeking justice for them, helping them, listening and comforting them, setting aside your own ego in order for them to get ahead, your love for others grows. The act of foot washing, of humble service, it's about the ordinary, the difficult, and the miraculous. About how God and God's magic and mysticism meets us in the moments of monotony, magnificence, and even mayhem. Jesus is meeting his disciples in this everyday, ordinary act of washing one's feet, or, as was often the case, of getting one's feet washed, and says, "Here, in this moment, my love resides," suggesting to us that even in our most ordinary and everyday moments, Jesus is there meeting us as well. In our everyday, waking up, brushing our teeth, washing our faces, eating our breakfast, spending time in the bathroom, washing our bodies, getting dressed, going to work, sitting in traffic, talking to our friends and families, Jesus meets us in these moments of seemingly monotony. In the moments of following Jesus' commandments closely, serving our neighbor, advocating for the oppressed, speaking up against institutions that cause harm, getting healed from COVID, turning away from bad habits, getting freed from addictions, Jesus meets us in the miraculous, and even in the moments of breaking our promises, being selfish or self-centered, causing a harder time for others, grasping for power, lying and cheating to get ahead, reverting back to ways we thought we'd long put behind us, hurting those closest to us, and betraying Jesus himself. Jesus meets us in our mayhem. And he holds us there just as he held his disciples. Jesus holds his disciples in their questioning. Jesus holds his disciples in their denial. Jesus holds his disciples in their eerie anticipation, and he holds his disciples in their soon-to-come grief. Even as he knows that possibly the one who is moments away from handing him over to the authorities is the one who will grieve him the most. And isn't that the way it goes? We grieve Jesus the most when we betray him, when we don't live into the ways that Jesus commanded us, when we do things, ugly things, that we know are against the will of Jesus, when we hurt one another, when we speak ill of one another, when we envy or resent one another, when we are, like Judas, walking closely beside someone and then, suddenly, envying their influence and power and betraying them, kissing their face while wishing for their demise. But then, because we know whose we are, it hits us. The grave weight of what we have done hits us, filling us with deep regret and deepest grief. I have compassion for Judas. He's always painted as the most awful, evil character, but Judas is each of us. Each of us who daily betray Jesus. Each of us who know better, but still go against the will of Jesus, the commandments of Jesus. To quote Professor Caroline Lewis, Judas doesn't betray Jesus by handing him over at his arrest. Jesus does that himself. Judas betrays Jesus when he leaves the room. He leaves the relationship, end quote. We betray Jesus when we don't choose love, but instead we choose revenge. Instead of confronting the misuse of power, we grasp at power for ourselves. Instead of humbling ourselves in an act of service for our neighbors, co-workers, partners, and friends, we choose our egos, stepping over each other to get ahead, arguing with one another to get our own way. And yet, we need to know that in the midst of all of this, Jesus holds us still. Judas didn't realize this. Judas didn't realize this truth in his final moment of regret. But we know this now. In our moments of betrayal, Jesus opens his arms and catches us, pulling us tightly to his chest, and forgives us over and over and over and over again, showing us the deepest compassion and humility, saying, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do," even when we do. He still runs to us and looks at us like little children, saying, "No, my beloved, you really don't. You really don't know what you do." I don't understand it, but grace can't be understood. All grace can do is be experienced, is wash over us like these waters, washing over our feet, our hands, our heads, reminding us that we are a part of all things connected to all things. In a moment, we pastors will each wash your feet if you want to come forward. Beloveds, let this foot washing be a reminder of God's grace pouring over you. And also, let it tell you that we, pastors, don't have it all together. That even though we stand up here and preach to you, we are still just working it out, wrestling with our own egos and acts of betrayal to the very heart of Jesus. And we come before you today humbly, grateful that you allow us to be people who walk alongside you, even though we too are broken. Let these waters connect yourselves to ourselves and to the holy waters of our baptisms and the eternal waters of our God. Let us love you with these waters. Let Jesus hold you in this act and in every moment and every day to come. And if you choose not to get your feet washed, think about our love for you and Jesus' great love and grace for you as you wash your bodies and your hands in moments to come. Remembering that Jesus comes to us, holding us in each of our moments of life as ordinary and everyday as water, and as miraculous and mystical as grace, drenching us in God's love. Amen.